Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today, and I'm pleased to be joined by our Minister of Trade and Export Development, the Honourable Jeremy Harrison, to make a significant announcement for Saskatchewan's small businesses. First, I can report today's COVID-19 case numbers, followed by some comments from Dr. Shahab, who is joining us on the phone line. Today, Saskatchewan has confirmed 7 new cases for a total of 278 cases. We have 12 new recoveries, bringing our total number of recovered cases to 115 across Saskatchewan, or about 41% of our total cases have now been recovered. Our active case number has again decreased today to 160 cases, down from 165 cases yesterday. Another significant milestone is that for the first time, the Roy Romanow Provincial Lab has processed over 1,000 tests in a day, with 1,051 tests processed yesterday. We will continue to ramp up testing and contact tracing with a target of processing over 1,500 tests per day by the end of this month. High levels of testing and contact tracing are keys to reducing the spread both now and in the weeks ahead, when we begin to lift restrictions and reopen businesses and services in communities across Saskatchewan. So again, I say thank you to the people of Saskatchewan for everything that you are doing to control the spread of COVID-19. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Shahab now for a brief overview on the phone line.
Thank you, Premier. So this is Dr. Saqib Shahab, and I won't go over the numbers, and the details are posted on the website, but I do want to confirm that our curve remains flat. Our deaths remain at 3, which is unchanged, and number in hospital remains at 8, which is again unchanged from yesterday. And I especially wanted to recognize and extend the thanks of myself and the entire health community to community and faith leaders in our province who are taking special precautions to keep their members safe this long weekend while remaining virtually and spiritually connected with them. I was very pleased to see media reports about the many innovative and creative steps that are being taken in our province to recognize these important celebrations in a safe and physically distant way this year. So I just wanted to thank all faith and community leaders for your continuing help to help us flatten the curve. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shahab, for what you do today and every day. And I want to echo Dr. Shahab's comments with respect to the fact that we are in a time of traditional celebration in Saskatchewan. It's Easter, it's Passover, it's Ramadan, and we have seen our faith communities embrace the physical distancing measures that we have collectively asked them to do. And I would encourage all of those celebrating this weekend to do so responsibly. Don't gather with those outside of your household. Don't go shopping unnecessarily. And I know this can be difficult, but these measures, they save lives. So thank you to each and every resident of Saskatchewan for continuing to pull together by staying apart. This afternoon, I'm pleased to announce a significant support program for small business in our province, the Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Payment. And our government is keenly aware that many small businesses in Saskatchewan have been ordered to either fully or partially close their doors to protect the public and the public health and to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in our province. We saw this reflected in today's labour force numbers reported by Statistics Canada. In March, Saskatchewan lost roughly 21,000 jobs compared to the month previous. Our unemployment rate rose to 7.3%. Those were the March numbers compiled in the early days of the COVID-related restrictions and closures that we are experiencing in this province. And I expect that we will see even more significant job losses when we get into April. These numbers represent real people who were working for Saskatchewan businesses and who are now unemployed. And they highlight the importance of Saskatchewan's small business receiving support from their government. Small and medium-sized enterprises in Saskatchewan have been critical drivers of our economy and job creation over Saskatchewan's last decade of growth, most certainly. And they will continue to create jobs, and they will continue to drive growth in the years ahead once we are through this pandemic. With nearly 150,000 small businesses in Saskatchewan, we have the highest concentration of small businesses in the nation of Canada. A quarter of all wages in Saskatchewan are paid by these small businesses, and 24% of Saskatchewan's GDP is attributed to these small businesses directly. But today, many of those businesses are being required to close or to significantly reduce their operations in order to protect the public health and safety, and they need and they deserve our assistance to help them through this very difficult period. So today, we are pleased to announce additional financial support to Saskatchewan businesses directly affected by the COVID-19 response. We are launching a new support program that's called the Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Payment. This program will provide direct financial support to small and medium-sized businesses that have had to temporarily close or significantly curtail their operations as a result of the current pandemic response. This program will provide these businesses with a one-time grant based on 15% of their monthly sales revenue to a maximum of $5,000. Eligible businesses must have been fully operational at the end of February and have experienced a loss of revenue and commit to reopening their business once these restrictions have been lifted. The program was designed to be simple, and it was designed to provide businesses with timely access to much-needed financial support. And it was designed to provide maximum flexibility to businesses. This grant is not dedicated to specific cost pressures. It's there for them to use as required. It was clear through the consultation process that many businesses are facing acute cash flow pressures in the immediate term, owing to fixed overhead costs such as rent payments, for example. And this new grant will help businesses address just such pressures. Businesses know best how to invest their dollars, and this flexibility will allow them to do just that. In addition, we will be asking that the federal government exempt this funding from the business income for tax purposes. We recognize that this support will not solve all of the problems facing businesses during this pandemic. However, this is the first step in our economic recovery efforts, and I do want to stress that we are committed to continuing to work with business throughout what is a very unprecedented time. Since this crisis began, I have said that our government will take a three-pronged approach, focusing on restrictions, focusing on resources, and on our economic recovery. Well, today's announcement recognizes that many small businesses have been hurt by the restrictions. So we are providing the resources to help ensure that those businesses can reopen when we begin our recovery. This new program supplements the supports that we have implemented already. These include waiving penalties and interest charges for 3 months for late PST returns. These include zero-interest bill deferrals for up to 6 months for our Crown utilities, and waiving Workers' Compensation Board premium penalties until June the 30th, 2020. We have also created the Business Response Team to help businesses navigate through all of the information and the programs that are available to them. And to date, the Business Response Team has fielded about 2,800 calls, and I'm sure that they'll be a bit busier with the launch of this program here today. In closing, I want to say thank you. Thank you to the business community for their continued input. To them, I would say this. I know this will not address all of the challenges that you are facing, but you should know this. We are in this together, and our government will continue to stand with you throughout this time. This is the first step as we work together towards a more broad-based economic recovery effort in the months ahead. Lastly, I want to encourage all Saskatchewan residents to do what you can to support local businesses. While they may be closed to the public, many businesses remain open through other options, such as delivery, such as pickup or online services, and many other options. That local businesses, recognize this, that local businesses have created jobs in your community. Recognize that local businesses have quite likely sponsored your local sports team or your community event. So if you are able now is the time for each and every one of us to return that support to our local business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier. We have about 25 minutes for questions. We'll take our first question from the phone line.
We have Arthur White-Crummey with the Leader Post.
Hello, this is a question for the Premier, Arthur White-Crummey here. I know that you said that in light of these job numbers that were just released by Stats Canada today, that you're expecting even worse numbers come April. I just want to get a sense of what exactly the provincial government is bracing for here. Do you think that there's a chance that the province could slip into a depression?
These numbers that came today, and these are not specific to Saskatchewan, they're nationwide. I was just on a call with the premiers, and we were discussing this among a number of other items. We're down 21,000 jobs month over month in this province. This is at the very front end of the restrictions that were put in place as we entered this COVID pandemic response. We are expecting that as those restrictions came into full force in the days after this Statistics Canada report was conducted, that we will see additional job losses not only in Saskatchewan but across the nation of Canada. What we're seeing today is an investment in small business, ultimately in the people that are employed by small business, to ensure that when we do get on the backside of this curve, that we have the small business community in the province so that we can actually have an economic recovery. And that's what today's announcement is about specifically. Do you have anything detailed with respect to the unemployment numbers as we move through the next number of days, Jeremy?
Yeah, well, thanks, Premier. Clearly we are facing an unprecedented challenge to our labor market. We saw that reflected in the numbers from Stats Canada today. We're going to continue to see that reflected in jobs reports to come. But what I would stress, and what part of today's announcement is about with regard to supporting our business operations to be viable when we come through this on the other end, is that our jurisdiction is likely one of the best positioned in the entire world in terms of the recovery. We have what the world needs, whether that be food, whether that be fertilizer, whether that be energy. We have what the world is going to need to recover and rebuild. And we're going to be prepared as a government under the Premier's leadership to be there when we get on the backside of this pandemic.
Do you have a follow-up, Arthur?
I do. This is again for the Premier. I'm just wondering what role this labor market data plays in the way that you assess the gradual return to normal in the province and the kind of relaxation of some of the limitations that you've put to control the spread of the disease. Does this kind of data play any role in those decisions, or is it made purely on the basis of public health concerns?
Well, the public health concern is driving our pandemic response right now. I think that is paramount, is that we have brought in a significant number of restrictions, and I would say that they are working. We are flattening the curve here in Saskatchewan, and that is due to not only the restrictions being in place, but it is due to people, the good people of Saskatchewan, adhering to those restrictions in community after community. And for that, I am forever thankful, as I know so many others are. But this is having an impact on our economy. And we are going to have to plan for how we, phase out of these restrictions at some point in time. And I do not have a date for that yet. However, we are starting to plan as to what exactly that would look like. And then two, how are we going to support the economic drivers of that recovery, and how are we going to support the re-engagement of people back into the workforce in those industries? Listen, the industries that create wealth in this province are our export-based industries: agriculture, mining, energy, manufacturing. The tech sector increasingly is becoming a big industry in communities here in Saskatchewan. Infrastructure can be part of the plan in how we recover from what is really an unprecedented health pandemic, an unprecedented preparation to provide health delivery services in light of this pandemic, and what will be an unprecedented impact in our economy, and is going to require an unprecedented response by government and the business community to ensure that we can get back to the robust economy that we know we have had and will continue to have here in Saskatchewan.
We'll take our next question from the room. Steph?
Yeah, Mr. Premier, I know you just recently spoke to your colleagues or counterparts in other provinces, and there's some reports the federal government is looking at the Emergency Measures Act. Have you had any indication from the federal government that Ottawa, the Prime Minister, is indeed looking at enacting the Emergency Measures Act, and have you received any kind of consultation letter asking for your thoughts on this?
There is a letter that is being circulated. I won't comment as to the content of the letter, and we have had discussions with the federal government with respect to the use of the Emergency Act federally. In saying that, Saskatchewan would remain steadfast, has been to this point in time, not specifically against the use of the Act, but we do not see the reason for the use of the Federal Emergency Act at this point in time. We have provincial acts in place here in Saskatchewan and in many provinces, and virtually all provinces and territories, and we don't see that the Federal Emergency Act would do anything that the provinces aren't already doing and collaborating closely on. I just got off a call with the premiers with respect to how we are continuing to align our response from coast to coast to coast in this nation, and how we are continuing to work together to ensure that we are addressing the challenges that we collectively face, but also have the flexibility with the provincial acts to address the challenges specifically within our specific jurisdiction. So we'll be consulting, I'm sure, with the Premier, the Prime Minister, possibly even today on this topic, but Saskatchewan at this point does not see the need for passing the Federal Emergencies Act.
Follow-up?
Yeah, but this letter, is it from the federal government? When did you kind of receive it?
I don't know what recently. We received it just recently, and I'm sure we'll be discussing it with the federal government. But the broader issue and the broader challenge here is how best do we respond to this healthcare challenge and ultimately to the economic recovery that needs to occur after. And we feel the provinces are working very collaboratively in doing that. We have weekly Council of Federation calls, as well as by having the provincial acts in place. There is nothing more that to date the federal government has indicated the Federal Emergency Act would improve on our situation, if you will. With respect to the provincial acts that are in place now. So we're working collaboratively with other provinces. We feel the current environment is most beneficial for all Canadians, and because it does provide for alignment across the nation, but it also provides for that provincial flexibility to address some of the challenges we have. Again.
We'll take our next question from the line. Operator?
We have Creedon Martel with CBC.
This is a question for the Premier, or possibly both Minister Harrison and Premier Moe. This is about the Emergency Support Fund. It says that it's a $50 million fund, and some of the things are, that people that businesses have to commit to reopening following, the cancellation of the public health order. I guess what oversight does the government have here to ensure that this money is spent appropriately? It says that it's not for any specific cost, at all. What is the government going to do to ensure that this money isn't, used on anything it shouldn't be?
Sure. Thanks, Premier. We've been in the course of our consultations with the business community over the last number of weeks. The biggest challenge that we have heard has been around largely fixed overhead costs. So that can be rent, that can be lease costs, but primarily around fixed overhead costs and very real cash flow problems to allocate these resources in the short term. And we're confident that this is something that we're going to be able to move forward with very quickly.
We'll take our next question from the line.
We have Lisa Schick with CJME.
Hi, I am just wondering, does this, for a business to be able to get money from this fund, are they not able to get federal funds, or does it matter if they're also getting federal help?
Some may be eligible for both.
You have a follow-up, Lisa?
Yes, and oh, sorry, I had a list too.
I would just say the overarching goal of this program is to get some funds in the hands of small business across this province as quickly as possible. We know and understand the challenges that they're being faced with, those that have had to close their doors completely, those that have had their revenues curtailed greatly. The focus of this program is to get some funding out the door, get it into the hands of small business, have it with no strings attached so that they can, they know best what to do with those valuable resources, and we want to get it to them as quickly as possible. That's the goal and the focus of this program.
And if I could, Premier, I mean, part of the challenge we've been hearing from business owners has been, a recognition that the supports that the federal government have announced are going to be significant, real, and helpful. But there are challenges in terms of timely access to those programs. So the wage subsidy program is going to be a more timely or take more time to access. The loan program that had been announced by the national government as well is going to take a longer period of time to access for a lot of businesses. So what we stepped in with was a program that will supplement those two programs to bring forward funding as quickly as we can, as the Premier well said, that businesses can deploy in the way that they feel will best keep their business moving forward.
We'll take our next question from the line.
We have Roberta Bell with Global.
Hi, I just had a question in regards to field hospitals for Dr. Shahab, just in following up a clarification on whether non-COVID patients are still allowed to go to COVID hospitals and or vice versa when they're initially getting care. Is there a clarification on who's allowed to actually go where?
So these questions can be answered in more detail at a future briefing by the SHA, but as Scott Livingston described yesterday, that this is a graded approach, stepwise approach. At the moment, all hospitals are working with enhanced capacity due to reduction in elective procedures. If and when we see increased hospitalizations, then a stepwise graded approach will be made by which some hospitals will not look only after COVID patients, but will be prioritized to look after COVID patients in a certain region, while other hospitals will prioritize non-COVID. So this allows staff and patient cohorting to reduce nosocomial transmission. And of course, at the moment, the expectation is that this will be sufficient to meet demand. But of course, if things continue significantly and there's significantly increased demand for hospital beds, which would be a worst-case scenario, then of course field hospitals will be deployed, which again could be used to provide care for non-COVID patients who require some level of hospital care in a different setting, or for COVID patients who require a lower level of care than an ICU. So this is just my high-level kind of response, but a more detailed response can be given at a future media availability. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Roberta?
Sorry, just to clarify then the difference between the mix and COVID-designated hospitals, even though COVID patients are allowed to go to both, is how they prioritize patients. Is that right?
Well, at the moment, you should always call ahead before going to any health facility, either in primary care or ER, to see if your care can be provided virtually, as it is being done through primary care for many COVID or non-COVID illnesses. But where urgent or emergent care is required, either you should call ahead before going to an ER or EMS, and others are alerted that you may have COVID, and then appropriate precautions are taken. And then at this point, we only have 8 people in hospital. But if admissions increase significantly, then of course it is more efficient initially within a single facility to cohort patients and staff between COVID parts of the hospital and non-COVID. It is just to prevent cross-contamination and nosocomial transmission. And then in a stepwise graded approach, a further cohorting is required of staff and patients. Then some hospitals will be prioritized to look primarily after COVID patients, and some will be prioritized to look after non-COVID patients. But that will be seamless in terms of where care is provided. It will not, individual patients don't have to worry about where they need to go. Thank you.
And we'll take our last question from the line. Operator?
We have Mark Smith with CTV.
Hi, Mr. Premier. I have a question about, I've heard from people in rural Saskatchewan that are concerned about emergency services being suspended at their hospitals as part of the COVID planning. Do you feel that rural Saskatchewan is prepared to deal with any potential surges?
Yes, I do. Rural Saskatchewan has been and will continue to be well served throughout this pandemic, both from an emergency services perspective as well as from a COVID response perspective. That is the plan that the Saskatchewan Health Authority went through here the other day. And listen, there will be a ramping up into that plan on a as needed basis. However, there will be some base temporary transition that will need to occur to ensure that we are ready should things should things with respect to the pandemic response become large from a health delivery perspective. So we are using the resources that we have from corner to corner in this province, understanding that there may be regional outbreaks in certain areas, and we need to be ready for that. And we're going to use all of the healthcare resources that we have to not only deliver our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but to ensure that we are continuing to provide the emergency services and the emergent services that people have had and continue to expect in their community.
Do you have a follow-up, Mark?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Great. And we'll take our last question from the room. Steph?
Yeah, Mr. Premier, what is your message to the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister going to be as there's this consultation and consideration of the Emergency Measures Act?
Well, my message would be at this point in time, Saskatchewan is not supportive for the reasons that we do not see the need to enact the federal act. There are a number of things, however, where the federal government could be supportive of the Canadian pandemic response, if you will, without using the Act. And some of those opportunities the federal government has stepped into. But for example, they could be supportive of the provincial collaboration that is occurring across this nation, the provincial and territorial collaboration that is occurring, and they are being supportive of that in the way of working with provinces and territories on procurement of personal protection equipment, working with us on the distribution of that equipment as we're working on a formula to ensure that provinces are well served, as well as personal protective equipment is getting to where it is required at the right time. They can continue to be supportive of Canadians, and they have been in the enacting of the CERB benefit, for example. But they have been as well supportive, I think, in many ways of industries with the wage subsidy that has come into place. We've dovetailed in on that here today with the Saskatchewan Emergency Small Business Grant. But I would say that there are other steps the federal government could take in being supportive of industries that employ people in communities across this province, industries like the energy industry. And I have called for before, and I'll call for again, the fact that the energy industry does require a commitment and a support from the federal government, similar to what the auto industry has received about a decade ago, as the challenges that the energy industry is facing now are similar in size and scope. And they do need, and there are levers that the federal government and only the federal government can pull in the way of providing liquidity to this industry to ensure that when we are on the backside of this curve, that we do not only have an agricultural and manufacturing, a forestry, but also an energy industry in this province to ensure that we can have and enjoy an economic recovery to the fullest.
A follow-up?
Yeah. What have you been told from them about why they're even looking at this or considering going down this route?
The concern that I have heard thus far is just to ensure that if there are tools that are available, the federal government wants to ensure that they are fully having the discussion around all of the tools that are available to them in a response to the pandemic. I have every reason to believe that as myself and potentially other premiers communicate that they feel that the use of this act at this point in time would at the very least be premature, Saskatchewan does not see the need for it, that the Prime Minister would take that advice take that advice seriously. So it is a discussion, not in any way a disagreement or an argument at this point in time. I would just say this in closing. We are thankful for the efforts that the federal government has made in the programs that they have provided and the opportunities that we then have to dovetail in like we are here today on behalf of small business in Saskatchewan. But we also feel there's opportunities where the federal government can do more without enacting the Emergency Measures Act. This is an act that's never been put into force in our nation, and we don't believe we are at that point yet.
So do other premiers, I just want to pick up on the point where, do other premiers agree with you that it would be premature, this isn't the time?
I'll let other premiers speak for themselves, and we may have more to say as a Council of Federation in the days ahead.
Thanks very much, everyone. That's all the time we have for today.